We are still seeing growth, so why hasn't this growth provided the jobs for our economy? Brian Hamilton, CEO of Sageworks, is with us. Thank you for being in the studio with us on Taking Stock.
It's great to be here.
Why aren't businesses hiring?
Well, it's a good question. Let's go back just a little bit and get some perspective. For the last 12 months, private companies in this country are growing between 5 and 7%. Their net margins are up, profits are up, efficiency's up. So the overall trend for private companies, and remember, there's 27 million of those companies versus only 5,000 or so publicly traded firms. Those companies are doing well. Now, why are they not hiring? Of course, we don't really know, so we even have to look at that closely and go to historical precedent. There have been times, almost every time in recession, where there's a lag between when the economy grows and when people get comfortable to hire. So we're at about 12 to 14 months into this cycle. It's not historically aberrational. It does happen. We hope that in 2012 people start hiring more. There's been snippets of good news on the job front. There's no question about that. But remember, there is definitely always a lag between when growth occurs and when people want to go back and increase their overhead, and you can't blame them.
So you're saying that we're at the point in the recovery pattern that we've seen, say, maybe since the 90s, because we got much stronger recoveries in the 80s and 70s and 60s recessions, where we'll see jobs starting to pick up.
Right. Let's go, and I'm going to date myself a little bit here.
Oh, go ahead.
But in the Nixon administration, for example, in the early 70s, there was a 33-month lag between when GDP went up and when people started creating jobs. When Reagan became president, it was only about 6 to 9 months. Right now, we're about, between 14, 15, 16 months into this. So, we tend to, and you have to, you got to look at today's newspaper, you got to look at what's going on right now, but you always have to put things in perspective. So we hope that these jobs will be created, but we don't know exactly when. And by the way, I don't want to blame the politicians. They're an easy target. But boy, they are easy because not just because they're not here, but also there really is just this malaise going on. And there's a lot of infighting between the Democrats and Republicans. Everybody's blaming everyone. And that does not help small business planning. It definitely does not help. So we can blame Washington with some credibility.
What's your reaction to the payroll tax debate that's happening now?
Great question. Again, let's go back 2 and 3 years into this administration. As a private company, and there's 27 million of them out there, these people are making individual decisions. Some of the public policy decisions over the last 3 years have been, a little bit definitely not on let's create jobs. This one, however, is lowering the overhead of privately held companies. When you lower costs, people are going to be more willing to spend money. It just makes common sense. So right now, if you're a Democrat, Republican, it doesn't really matter. There's a net gain, in my view, for lowering payroll taxes, for lowering any cost you can, because that makes people more comfortable about hiring.
Brian, a lot of people would say the big problem for not hiring is demand, and for a lot of small businesses. If you look at the NFIB survey of small businesses, they talk about regulation, uncertainty, but the number one thing is lack of demand.
All right, Kathleen, let's really look at that, because we look at that survey all the time. Remember, let's look at the facts, right? Sageworks gathers data on thousands and thousands of privately held companies. So there's this disparity between what people think's happening on demand and what's really happening. And I'm very familiar with that survey. That survey says people are feeling a little bit better, but not great. However, their revenue is going up. We've got to look at the facts.
Very powerful signal.
What is the small business picture looking like when we're looking at the financial shape of the companies, their sales and profit right now?
Yeah, well, revenues are up, profit margins are up, profits are up consistently over the past 12 to 14 months, and probably by about 5 to 7%, give or take a couple of points. So things are going well.
Brian, do you get a sense? I was talking about this a lot more 2 years ago when we were so, looking at the labor market, all the cuts, because it seems to me that companies cut so very, very much. They're so lean and mean when it comes to jobs that it wouldn't take too big of an increase in demand for them to need to hire, because people can't work to infinity. I mean, you can't work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's all kinds of anecdotal stories about overtime in factories, all that. At some point, how close are companies to that point where everybody's stretched as soon as they can be, and like it or not, uncertain or not, they have to hire more workers?
And I'm not going to answer that one because it's a great question. It really is. We don't know exactly, but your point is incredibly well taken. And there are people out there right now, definitely, you know this, right? Economists saying that this is going to be a jobless jobless recovery, that revenue is going to go up, people aren't going to hire. From our data, and remember, we're gathering tons of data on these private companies, you cannot permanently increase revenue without hiring people. You just cannot do it. So we don't buy that whole argument. In fact, there's no historical precedent for that in the entire history of the United States. Now, it's true. Companies are more efficient. You know that in your neighborhood. People are going to work earlier. They're working later.
Working at home on their dang laptops.
Right, they've got technology tools. We know that. But that does not mean that these companies will not hire. When revenue goes up, they will hire people. And that's always been true.
Yay.
What's the solution for getting jobs back?
Well, you may not like to hear this one because I think it's a great question, Courtney. And we always, I don't want to ramble too much on this point and get off track here, but there's almost this inherent feeling or belief that what can we do? Do you know what I mean? In other words, we've had recessionary cycles, we've had expansionary cycles for 200 years. What can we do? The truth is, I'm going to turn that over and say, what would we not want to do? In other words, from a public policy perspective, our view is we don't want to do anything to the people making decisions that is going to disrupt their planning. Because remember, they take profits, unlike big companies and unlike publicly traded firms, they are using their profits to eat, right?
Small and mid-sized businesses,
of course they are.
And they're the bulk of the job
They've got mortgages,
creators.
they've got credit cards, they've got student loans. I mean, they've got all these concerns. So when their profit goes down, they start to look at that very carefully. So here's the thing. When they are planning, we don't want to do anything to disrupt their planning. Even, by the way, if there's going to be something we might call it a negative policy, if we know exactly what that is, we can plan around it. So I don't know how much the government can do, frankly, but the government certainly doesn't want to take missteps. And frankly, over the last 3 years, it's been a bit skitsy in public policy from a business perspective and how do I plan for my business. I don't think that's just hype. I think it's real.
Brian Hamilton, thanks so much for being with us. Thanks for coming into the studio, CEO of Sageworks.